How do you really destroy a kingdom? You might think you defeat its army or capture its king. But what if that kingdom's true strength isn't in its soldiers, but in its soil? How do you take a nation's rice bowl, a thriving region of 100,000 fertile fields, and turn it into a barren wasteland?
So here's how we're going to unpack the tragic fall of the Kandyan kingdom. First, we'll look at its incredible water lifeline. Then we'll see exactly how a rebellion was ignited, how water and famine were turned into weapons, and how the war was then fought with laws instead of guns. And finally, we'll look at the legacy that endures to this day.
Okay, first things first, to really grasp the scale of the devastation, you have to appreciate what was lost. The Kandyan kingdom, especially the Uva-Wellassa region, wasn't just built on land. It was built on an absolute mastery of water that had kept it alive and thriving for centuries.
And at the heart of it all was this concept of a hydraulic civilization. Now, this wasn't just about digging some ditches for farming. No. Their entire social fabric, everything from the king's duties down to a farmer's daily labor, was completely organized around this incredibly intricate network of water tanks and canals.
The name itself, Uva-Wellassa, literally tells you everything you need to know about how important it was. This rice bowl produced a massive surplus of food, and that was the secret to the kingdom's incredible resilience. It's what allowed them to stay independent and fight off colonial powers for so long.
And the system they built was just remarkable in its sophistication. They used something called a tank cascade pattern, which cleverly linked reservoirs together to manage water flow across the landscape. And the engine that powered this whole thing was a system called Rajakariya, a form of mandatory communal labor. Now, this wasn't just about getting free work. It was the social contract, the very glue that held their society together and made sure this vital infrastructure was maintained for generations.
So you have this highly organized, totally self-sustaining society. What on earth could push them into open rebellion? Well, it didn't start with a battle. It started with a calculated administrative insult.
After the British took control in 1815, you could feel the tension ratcheting up almost immediately. The real flashpoint came in 1817. The British appointed a Muslim trader to a powerful post that was traditionally held by the Kandyan aristocracy. This was seen as a massive humiliation. When a British official, Sylvester Wilson, went to investigate the growing unrest, he was killed. And just like that, by early 1818, the entire region was under martial law.
And this was the moment everything changed. A local protest just exploded into a national uprising. See, Keptitipola was a very high-ranking chief. When he dramatically switched sides, he brought legitimacy, deep local knowledge, and, get this, British-issued weapons with him. He single-handedly transformed the rebellion into a full-blown guerrilla war that put British control over the entire island interior at risk. The Kandyan fighters used the jungle and the mountains to their advantage, and the British realized pretty quickly they couldn't win a conventional fight here. So they changed tactics. They adopted a brutal scorched earth strategy that aimed right for the heart of Kandyan life, its water and its food.
I mean, the clarity of this official order is what's truly bone-chilling. This wasn't just collateral damage that happens in the heat of battle. This was a direct, explicit policy from the highest level of government to systematically dismantle an infrastructure that had sustained a civilization for 2,000 years. It's one of history's clearest and most brutal examples of environmental warfare.
And their approach was terrifyingly systematic. British troops were ordered to breach the walls of the water tanks, poison wells, burn all the rice stores, and block the canals. The goal was simple, and it was brutal: starve the entire population, men, women, and children, into submission.
The human cost was just staggering. The estimated death toll for the Kandyans was over 10,000 people. And what's so critical to understand is that many of these victims weren't soldiers. They were farmers, they were families, who died from the famine and the disease that ripped through the population after their fields and water were destroyed. And for comparison, this was the British death toll. To put it in perspective, only about 1,000 British soldiers died, and most of them died from tropical diseases, not from combat. The numbers just lay bare the profoundly lopsided human cost of this strategy. So after crushing the rebellion through starvation, you might think the war was over. But it wasn't. The conflict just moved from the battlefield to the law books. It became a new kind of war, fought with ordinances and proclamations designed to make the destruction permanent. It was this methodical, three-step legal assault.
First, they confiscated the lands of anyone they called a traitor. Then, they completely abolished the Rajakariya system. This wasn't just some administrative tweak. It severed the social and practical bond that kept the irrigation system alive. Without that communal labor, the remaining tanks and canals just crumbled into ruin. And then came the final administrative blow. This law basically said that any land without a written paper deed was now the property of the crown. Since Kandyan land ownership was all based on tradition and oral agreements, not paper titles, the government was able to legally seize millions of acres of ancestral land. And this, right here, paved the way for a brand new economic model, the plantation. The consequences of all these actions, military and legal, were incredibly long-lasting. In fact, the scars from this period are still physically visible today, both on the landscape itself and in the fabric of the region's society.
I mean, just look at this transformation. It's night and day. A completely self-sufficient, food-producing heartland became an impoverished district that was totally dependent on imported food. The old communal society was shattered and replaced by a colonial plantation economy built on seized land.
The environmental destruction was just catastrophic, and it was permanent. They cleared huge swaths of forest for coffee and tea plantations, which destroyed the natural watersheds. This led to massive soil erosion and an incredible drop in the water table. By the late 1800s, the available surface water had fallen by an estimated 50%, creating the dry, poverty-stricken conditions that still plague the province today.
And this brings us almost to the present day. For nearly 2 centuries, the leaders of this uprising were officially branded as traitors in government records. But in 2016, that was finally reversed. The Sri Lankan government officially declared them national heroes, completely reframing the conflict not as a rebellion, but as a freedom struggle.
All of this leaves us with a really profound final thought. The story of Uva-Wellassa isn't just about a forgotten war. It's a powerful story about how destroying an environment can be a tool for destroying an entire society. And it forces us to ask a difficult question. When the evidence of historical trauma is literally etched into the earth, in the broken reservoirs and the dry riverbeds, what does healing even look like?